Okay, so in this video, we're going to get into updating data to the database. In the first two, we could create data. So, for example, I could just put something here and go like that, and that would add something to the database. There, just added right here. Just added that right there. I'll put something else, something more original. So we could put this here like this, and that would be right. That was added right there, and it would also show up in the database. Maybe we can find it. Um, of course, it's all the way at the end. Yeah, original. So this was just basically created in the database, and then the part where it gets it can come on the application is part of like reading the data from the database. So now we're going to get into updating data, because as you can see right now, when that was made, it was made as false. But if I manipulate this like this, it is still false, right? So we haven't yet been able to communicate with the database and tell it to update these properties, which we want to be able to do, okay? Right now, there is some functionality where this right here, like if I click on it and click on it, it does have the property of completed in the state, and therefore we can manipulate stuff, you know, on the application. However, we're not making any communication with the database, and therefore, if you were to log on again somewhere else, you wouldn't be able to get the change, or the change wouldn't be made in the database, and therefore it couldn't be received somewhere else. So that's the problem. So right now, we have which is this this function is good for you know, for local use. This one right here. That's good. That's good for getting the this crossed off like it is, or not crossed off. So that works well for that. But what we want to do is, since we want to send things to the database, we need to be able to uh, basically create another function, um, which is going to be able to take the ID that we're using, and also take the whether or not it's going to be true or false, and use that to make the change in the database. So because we're going to want to do those two things, we need to make two new hooks. One of them is going to concern the ID of the update. So we'll say call it ID of update, and then set ID of update. That's the action part. And we'll say equals use state, and we'll just close this, but we'll put null inside. Then the next part will be const, we'll say truth. And that doesn't mean that we're saying the value of truth could be true or false. We'll say set truth, and then equals use state, and we'll just have close parentheses right there. I'm going to have that and that. I'll go like that. Okay, so I have the two hooks ready to be used, but you can see that they're not lit up, which means they're not yet noticing anything. So the next thing we want to do is, after this change is made and marked complete, we want to do something else. We want to basically set truth, or set the condition of truth to whatever this new thing is. So this new thing, this to do completed, could be true or false, right? I mean, we see it in the database with all of these, whether they're false or true. So that's this here is going to carry a value with it, right? And what it means is that if the to-do coming in is true right here, then we'll say we're going to call it the opposite. That's what that exclamation means, the opposite of whatever it was. So it's going to change. But after it changes, after that change is made, we want to make a set timeout. And we're going to parentheses and we'll just say function like that. I don't know why I put times. And then this, and then inside here we're going to set truth, which is basically using the hook that we just made to say set truth, and set truth will now be set, or will now be to do dot completed, and we're going to, after the bracket, we're going to write 1000, which means 1 second. So 1 second, 1 second after this function is called, we're going to set the truth to whatever it now is. And the reason why we do 1000 or a certain amount of time is because you can do half second, you can do anything, but we want this to settle, or this to take place. So whatever it started out with, it's going to make the change, and then this function is run, but this, what's inside there, isn't going to happen until one second later. But you give the time so that you make sure that you're setting the truth not to the initial value, but to the value that came afterwards, which would be this new one, right? So that's what happens right there. Now, after set truth gets changed, then we can basically call the second function that we want to call. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to make another use effect. So we write use effect, and we'll say double parentheses equals like this, arrow function. And now inside use effect, we're going to say let ID equals ID of update. So the state of ID of update, which is up here, so this right there, and we're just going to call it ID just to keep it simple, or maybe make it more complicated. And then we're going to say, we're going to add a condition. We'll say if the ID is not null, that's our condition, then we'll make a new function that will be run. So we'll say mark complete global. And we haven't made this function yet, but we're going to say that this function will be run if this ID is not null. And then within, we also, for the use effect, we have to finish it off by doing this, by writing a comma and then having an array. And the purpose of this here array that we have is that we can have this use effect be called if there's a certain state that changes. And what we want it to be called whenever truth is updated. Whenever this state here is updated, we want this function to run, okay? But in running, it will only run if ID, the ID of update has been changed. And for right now, it's not going to be changed because we didn't make a simple edit, which I needed to make, which was inside mark complete. Whenever this first function occurs, which is when we click on this, when we click on these checkboxes, oh, that's messed up. But when we click on the checkboxes, this mark complete, the initial mark complete, is run. Well, what we want to do right away with that is to just say set ID of update to also be ID. So the with the checkbox, when that's clicked, this ID is passed, which is gotten through the click. We want to set the ID of update to that, and what that means is that as soon as the checkbox is clicked, this will no longer be the case. It won't be null, right? And if it's not null, then when you have this use effect and the ID right here, that won't be null, and then we know that this function can be run. Okay, so that's how all of that works. And again, it gets called right away at like a component did mount. We don't want it to run in that case because there's no ID for it to switch, for it to change in the database. So this function is only going to get run if there has been a new check to one of those checkboxes, and there is now an ID that is not that changes the value of this to something other than null. So that's when it's going to get run. So now we can create this function which we want to get run every time truth changes, and there is an ID. So we'll say const mark complete global equals so this function is going to get run every time. So we just got to decide what we want that to be. So we'll say for the start, we'll just say let ID equals ID of update. So that's the state, whatever state it is. And then we'll say const, and this is where we're going to contact the database and then eventually change the state or the property of completed in each item. So we'll say item to update equals Firebase. Go to the next line. Dot Firestore dot collection. We got to specify the collection. It's to-dos, and then we'll say what document do we want? We want the one that has an ID that we're updating. And then go like this. We should have, so now after that we'll say that const, we're going to use this right here, and we'll just say item to update dot update, and then we'll say in parentheses and brackets like that, and we'll say inside the brackets we'll say completed should be the state of truth. Now that could be true or false. It's just the value of that hook right here, whatever value this is. So now once that happens, we've done what we needed to do. We updated it in the database so that's consistent with what is there. So now we just want to reset those states so that it doesn't interfere with any other updates that are made. So we're just going to say set ID of update, and we're going to set that right now, and that's afterwards to null, and we're going to do the same thing to the set truth to truth. So we'll say set truth to null as well. So this way the functions are ready to work again, and that gets rid of it. So that should be enough. Should be right. So now we're just hoping for a this to be consistent. So I'm going to go, right now original is false. I'm going to go to original, and I'm going to manipulate it. Should be true now. So, and it is true. Let's try another one. I'll go to the new A. So that is right. Where is that? Right here. So now that should be false. Huh. Oh no, it should be true. Let me change that to false. I changed to false, sorry. I'll just do one more. So new book, let's look for new book, or let's just check with one more. Let's go to mind subscribing. Mind subscribing is true, which should mean that it is select. So I'm going to click this. It should be false now, and it is false. Okay, so it does work. All right. So that was that's how you would do updating to the database, and that's it for this video.